3 ways to deal with intrusive thoughts. Hi there, Chris Piercy of Gist Coaching, here today to talk to you about how to deal with intrusive thoughts. Now, an intrusive thought is any thought that comes into your head which affects your mood in a negative way. It's something that comes along and refuses to leave your brain like an uninvited guest, not listening to your subtle hints about having an early start in the morning and things like that. But it's any thought that you just rather wasn't there anymore. Now, the 3 different techniques I'm going to be teaching you each have their own merits. They are a couple of them are complete opposites. And this is the thing, that anxiety is not the same for every single person. It's not like there's a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with anxiety. So I've offered 3 different ones. 2 are kind of similar-ish and 1 is very different. But I use all of them in some way, or have used all of them in the past for various different reasons. I feel like they're very good at different times. Now, one of them I'll be talking about at the end is the one that I use most within the therapy sessions for anxiety that I give to people. But I feel like the first 2 are very, very important. So 3 techniques are identify, accept, redirect. That's the first one. The second one is a mindfulness approach. And the third one is something called Socratic Questioning. Now, before we can do anything with any of these, we first need to get better at identifying intrusive thoughts. So I'm going to talk about that now. Identifying intrusive thoughts is actually probably the most difficult step out of all of this, because particularly when we're feeling heightened anxiety, it's very difficult to know exactly what thought is going on in our head. It can often feel like a bit of a swirling mess rather than a big neon sign flashing saying, this is what I'm thinking this right now. So it can often be after the fact that you identify what thoughts you were thinking at that time, because intrusive thoughts can often be something that's quite recurrent. So there's normally a particular situation or a particular thing that makes your anxiety worse. So if you've been through that a whole bunch of times, you may already know and be able to identify exactly what the thought is. If you don't, then you can go back to it like mentally afterwards and go, right, what was I thinking? What was the main powerful intrusive thought that was going through my head at that particular moment? And whatever thought or thoughts you have, write them down. Write them down so you know what they are. So when they come up again, you go, that's an intrusive thought. This is what I think when I'm in that moment. Because that's, like I said, identifying it is the hardest and most important step. Identifying thoughts is a skill. And by that I mean it's something that as you do more, you will get better and better at it. So next time you feel anxious, just try and dial into your brain and go, right, what is the thought that's going on in my head? Because our thoughts control how we feel. So if we can control our thoughts, we can control how we feel. This is kind of the very base level of what's cognitive behavioural therapy is all about. I'd strongly recommend either putting something in the notes on your phone or writing down on a bit of paper, or if you journal, the exact thoughts that you have when you feel anxious, because this will be really helpful for use in the 3 methods which we're going to go into now. So I strongly advise starting what I would call a thought diary. So the first method is identify, accept, redirect. Now, it's going to blow your mind here, but with identify, accept, redirect, what you do is you identify the thought, you accept it, and then you redirect yourself. Crazy, right? So given that I've just gone through the whole thing about identifying thoughts, we now move on to accepting them. Now, in this stage, we accept what the thought is. Crazy, right? Now, I realise that is easier said than done. And what we mean by this is that once we've identified a thought, we accept that it is an intrusive thought and that we are thinking it. And to not kind of judge yourself based upon the fact that you're having a particular thought. Now, an intrusive thought is any thought that is negatively impacting on your mood. So it's kind of going, yep, I've identified this thought here, and I now accept that this is an intrusive thought. One of my preferred methods for identifying whether a thought is intrusive or not is to go, right, okay, you, thought, right there. Are you helpful to me or are you unhelpful to me? If you put it down as a kind of a black and white scenario, we go, right, is this thought helpful to me? And if the answer is no, then you go, right, you are definitely an intrusive thought. Thoughts are not facts. Now, this is one of the biggest things that people, particularly people with anxiety, need to recognize, that anything you think is not a fact. Your brain can think anything. You can go, what if I look like Ryan Reynolds? How different would my life be? Or you can just think, oh, I'm utterly worthless and there's no point in me living at all. No, just because we think either of those things doesn't make either of those things true or even worth our time. In truth, on any given day, we might actually think more untrue things than true things. Recognizing a thought, identifying it as an intrusive one, and then accepting this is one of the most important parts of this step. Once we've realised we're having an untrue, intrusive thought, we can then decide how much energy we are going to spend on that thought. Let's look at the two extremes in an example. Now let's say you have the thought, I'm ugly and no one would ever want to be with me. Now if you suffer with anxiety or you suffer with low mood or you suffer with depression, then you can decide that you're going to put a lot of weight on that thought. Now let's have a think. If you're saying to yourself, I'm ugly and no one will ever want to be with me, now if you were to say that to someone else, how would that make them feel? You're ugly and no one would ever want to be with you. That's going to make them feel pretty awful. That's going to make them feel pretty bad inside. It's probably going to make them feel ugly, and it's probably going to make them feel like they're going to be alone forever. So if that's how it would make another person feel, then saying it to yourself and allowing that thought and putting lots of energy onto the thought is going to make you feel ugly and as if no one would ever want to be with you. See how the thought controls how you feel. If you give this thought your energy, you're going to be feeling pretty terrible. Your self-confidence will probably go down, your self-esteem will probably drop, and the more you say it to yourself, the more you'll believe it, so the harder it will be for you to believe that the opposite is in fact true. As a result, you will feel like you're ugly, and as a result, you'll probably then spend less time and less energy even looking for another partner, so you won't end up with a partner, and it ends up being a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Giving energy to a thought such as that does you no good whatsoever. There is no positive outcome to you giving any energy to that thought at all. The more of your energy you give to that thought, the more you will believe it. And when I say energy, I'm not talking about anything mystical or universal or anything kind of spiritual like that. I'm talking about literally your energy, because thinking actually does burn thoughts. Never like you just get to the end of the day and you've had a long day and you can't even make the decision about, what to put onto Netflix or what to have for dinner, because you've burned all of your energy from the day and you're just exhausted. And it's more difficult to make a decision because thinking actually burns energy. So I'm not talking about anything woo-woo whatsoever. I'm talking about literal energy. On the other end of the scale is you deciding, hey, I'm not going to give that thought any energy, in which case you can just simply move on to the next one. So it's an obvious question, but which do you think is going to be more beneficial to you? Deciding to invest your time and energy thinking about how ugly and how you're unlovable you are or whatever, is it going to be worth spending your energy on that, or worth going, you know what, I'm going to decide to not think about that? And finally, we redirect. Now with the redirect, it's simply redirecting your attention to something else. So let's say you've had this thought, you've recognised it intrusive, you've accepted that, you've decided you're not going to put any energy into it whatsoever, and now it's time for you to redirect yourself towards something positive. So what is it that you like doing? What makes you feel good? Do you like listening to podcasts? Do you like running? Do you like seeing friends? Do you like just catching up with people? What do you like to do? Do you like to paint? Do you like to draw? Whatever it is that you can do in that moment, you do that. And that is your thing that you do. So you need to find that thing to redirect yourself towards, and maybe go, right, if I'm in the car, then I'll switch on the radio and sing along to whatever song is on. If you're at home, you go, right, I'm feeling like I'm going to get out my art stuff, I'm going to start a drawing. You need to find something, find a way, find a place to redirect your attention towards, so that you're not thinking about this intrusive thought. You direct your energy, your literal energy, towards the thing that is going to make you feel better. The mindfulness approach to intrusive thoughts. Now this is my preferred method of dealing with intrusive thoughts, or any thoughts that I have, if I'm trying to get to sleep at night, or I've woken up at night and my brain switches on and starts thinking about stuff. This is when I like to use it, but it can be used at any time whatsoever. Now, first of all, it's important to be good at recognizing what you're thinking. So going back to that identify stage that was kind of mentioned earlier on. Now, I'll be honest, I can't remember where I learned this particular thing from. I don't remember reading it in a book. I don't remember anyone ever teaching me it. It's almost certainly not original to me. I just don't know who to credit for it. But this is the method that I use. It's an incredibly simple 3-step method. Step 1, identify the thought. Step 2, say it to yourself, either in your head or out loud. And then step 3, follow up with, and that's okay. That's it. 3 steps. This approach relies upon us truly believing that we're allowed to think anything. Because as human beings, we think anything, from the most beautiful things to the most crazy things to the most disgusting things, because thoughts just enter into our head completely randomly out of absolutely nowhere. And as we said in the IAR approach, thoughts are not facts. Just because you're thinking anything doesn't mean it's true, and just because you're thinking anything doesn't make you a bad person. It's just a thought. So this mindfulness approach relies on identifying a thought and recognizing that it's okay to think it. It's like, no matter what it is that you're thinking, you just say it's okay. It's zero judgment goes onto the thought. It's just a thought. It comes along in the breeze, and you just let it go. Oh, there's a thought there. Okay, that's okay. No matter what the thought is, even if it's the worst thing you could possibly imagine thinking, it's still okay. Remember, thoughts are not facts. Let's look at the alternative. Let's say that you decide to judge yourself based on every single thought that you had. It's like, oh my God, I thought about kicking next door's cat because it's so annoying. Oh my God, I thought about this. Oh my God, I thought about that girl at the office who I know is married. Oh my God, I thought about this. I'm a terrible person. It's like, well, how good are you going to feel about yourself if you judge yourself based on every single thought that enters into your head? I prefer the alternative of just accepting that you can think these things and it's okay. There's no thought police. Yet. So instead, we just take a really calm approach to any thought that enters into our mind. So, for example, you might say, I'm thinking about that terrible mistake I made at work today, and that's okay. I'm thinking about how much I hate my boss, and that's okay. I'm thinking about the girl that serves me in Starbucks every Tuesday, and that's okay. I'm thinking about how lonely I am, and that's okay. Just going through this process, no matter what thought comes into your head, saying it to yourself calmly and following up with, and that's okay. Now, this mindfulness approach does take patience and it does take practice. Now, what can happen is you can let yourself get dragged off by one of these thoughts whilst you're doing this. So maybe you go, I'm thinking about the girl at Starbucks on Tuesday, and that's okay. And I wonder her accent. Where does that accent come from? And she's got this. I like her hair. Her hair's and if you notice that you're doing that, you can just simply bring yourself back to the moment again and go, I started thinking more about the Starbucks girl, and that's okay. You see, no matter what happens, you can just bring yourself back to that moment and say, and that's okay. And just in case you're wondering, there is no Starbucks girl, I just made the whole thing up. Sorry to disappoint. Just keep calm and tell yourself that no matter what you're thinking, no matter how rude, inappropriate, boring, interesting your thought is, that it's just a thought and it's okay to be thinking it. Socratic questioning of intrusive thoughts. If the mindfulness approach to dealing with intrusive thoughts is like just watching them flutter by gently in the wind, then the Socratic questioning approach to intrusive thoughts is akin to grabbing one of those thoughts out of the air, shoving it in a room, locking yourself in with it, and interrogating it until it speaks the truth. Socratic questioning is a blunt, honest interrogation of a thought just to find out just how true it really is. And to see if there's any foul play at work. This can be done after the fact so that if that thought comes up again, you know how to deal with it. Example Socratic questioning of an intrusive thought. Here's some sample Socratic questions that you might ask yourself if you were having that thought. Is this something that you know everyone else thinks, or are you just thinking it yourself? Would you say this to your best friend? Do you have any evidence at all to disprove what you're saying? What would a friend or family member say to you about this? Is what you're saying subjective? How did you come to this conclusion? How do you know this? Is there a more kind or more helpful way of looking at this situation? Are you really that unlovable? How would you respond if I was to say that to you? There are so many questions that you can ask of these thoughts, and I'm sure you can see that if you answer this, then it can actually kind of spiral into a bit of a conversation with yourself about whatever question you've asked that thought. I'll go into an example of that in just a moment. My favourite thing to use in the therapy session when we're dealing with something like this is to simply ask, would you say this to your best friend? And would they almost act disgusted? So, oh God, no! I'd never say that to my best friend. And you go, well, why would you say it to yourself then? And you point out to the person and you realise the level of double standards that you have in regards to what's okay to say to yourself compared to what it's okay to say to other people, despite the fact that you are no different to them. Questioning your thoughts in the moment, particularly at the start when you get into this, can be really, really difficult to do. So it's often better to do it after an event and you know what thought you were thinking at the time, so that if that thought comes up again, you can go through the process easily and reach your conclusion. Now, I've got a list of over 60 different Socratic questions, which you can download for free. They are in my anxiety toolkit. There is a link in the notes below so that you can grab hold of that. But right now I'm going to go through an example of how Socratic questioning might go down in this situation. So here's how a conversation in my therapy room might go down if I'm doing Socratic questioning of this particular thought. I'm ugly and no one will ever want to be with me. According to who? According to me. So does anyone else think this? Probably. Do you have any proof of this, or are you just making assumptions? No, I don't have any proof, but I have been called ugly before. And when that happens, how did that make you feel? Oh, it made me feel ugly and sad. So if being called ugly made you feel ugly and sad, do you think it's a helpful or unhelpful thing to be thinking and saying to yourself? Unhelpful? So what would be a better thing to say to yourself? After that, we would then go in the therapy session to create a true and helpful thought that could replace this horrible thought that we're having about us being ugly and never going to be with us. What could we say to ourselves that would be true and helpful? We'd create something which the client actually believes to be true and is also helpful to them. Because it's all very well having something that you just say, but if you don't believe it, then it doesn't work. So it has to be something true. So we create a thought together which builds them up rather than grinds them down. Socratic questioning does end up being a little bit of a kind of internal conversation, and you can end up having this kind of yes, but, or no, but, because you're beginning to question what you genuinely think is true, not necessarily true, but you think it's true. And when you have someone or something like questioning what you believe to be true, there's, even if it's damaging to you, you kind of have this thing where you want to kind of hold on to that because you believe it's true and you don't want that to be torn down in front of you. So the yes but and no but does come up quite a lot. So it does end up being more of a conversation than just a kind of snappy answer back. Socratic questioning requires you to be accountable and honest with yourself. It is certainly a skill, but it is something which is learnable. Now, if this is something that you'd like to take further, then obviously you can get in contact with me about having anxiety therapy with me. Intrusive thoughts can be very upsetting, they can be very mood damaging, but also they can be accepted, they can be completely ignored, or they can be interrogated if you want. The act of first identifying exactly what you're thinking in a stressful situation is one of the most powerful weapons that you can have against anxiety. As I've said, none of the three methods are better than any of the other ones, but it's kind of very, very situational and it's very kind of person dependent as well. For me personally, when I'm dealing with people in a therapy situation, my go-to first of all is Socratic questioning, although because it's easier to do in a kind of a one-on-one situation than doing for yourself, but you obviously, like I said, you can learn it. But the reason I value Socratic questioning above the other two in the first instance is because, as I mentioned a short while ago, people are very, they like their thoughts. Their thoughts are theirs. So even if their thoughts are damaging, they're very protective of them. So Socratic questioning, because it's so blunt, and it can be done in a kind way, but it's logic. It's a logical approach. So it's very kind of down the line, and because of that, it knocks people off of their thinking because it's quite a harsh approach to it. But it needs to be, because people who have anxiety have been thinking these awful things for years. They've kind of ingrained it into their brain. They've been created a real furrow. They've been ploughing that thought into their brain deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So they just categorically believe that to be true. So they need, in my opinion, in the first instance, someone to kind of shove them off that track, because that track is not helping them whatsoever. And just kind of say, hey, you realise that track that you're on that makes you feel like shit? There's actually all these other tracks and thoughts over here that you could be on, so why don't we go and look at some of them and see if they help you? So that's what I personally prefer in the first instance, and then as people become better at identifying their thoughts and become kind of more self-efficient, then the other couple of techniques can be better. But if you're doing it just by yourself, then the first two are probably going to be easier for you. Now, if you suffer with anxiety, and I'm relatively certain that you do, if you've listened this far, then please consider picking up my anxiety toolkit. It is completely free. There's a link in the notes below. Go and check it out. It has loads of different resources and blogs and videos all about dealing with anxiety. So whether you want to have more information about what to do if you're an overthinker, or whether you just want to have a little bit of a cheat sheet about what you should do if you catastrophize a lot, there's loads of information there. It will be continually added to, so do consider picking that up. The link is below, as I mentioned. I've been Chris Piercy of Gist Coaching, and I hope to catch you again soon.